Do you think of rocks as inanimate objects with little interest? Perhaps you think that rocks have always existed and you don't question yourself how they formed. If so, you will be surprised to learn that rocks often bear witness of extraordinary events, and although technically they are indeed not alive, they can be said to have a life because they are formed, often transformed, and sooner or later they will end up being destroyed in a continuous cycle known as the rock cycle. So let's start at the beginning and discuss how rocks are formed. There are actually 3 different ways of forming a rock. The first possibility is to solidify some lava or some magma. Take for example a lava flow from an erupting volcano. Initially the lava is hot and fluid, but as it cools down, it first forms a crust and over time becomes completely solid. Rocks formed this way are called magmatic rocks. Magmatic rocks are not limited to active volcanoes. They also form at mid-ocean ridges, the places where tectonic plates move away from each other and leave room for magma to rise towards the surface and spread on the ocean floor. On contact with water, the magma cools to form the rock that make up the oceanic crust. Magma can also form below the continents, but there it usually rises too slowly to reach the surface and crystallizes into magmatic rocks at depth. This is, for example, how granite is formed. So, most of the Earth's crust, whether oceanic or continental, is formed by magmatic rocks. However, as you walk on the Earth's surface, it is another type of rock that you'll come across most often. Let's go back to a rock formed by the solidification of lava. As soon as it is formed, the rock begins to be attacked by the elements. Rain, wind, temperature changes, the action of waves, and sometimes simply the force of gravity cause all rocks on the Earth's surface to weather and erode. Rock fragments of all sizes break off and are carried downstream or downwind. These fragments, known as sediments, will eventually be deposited elsewhere, for example on the banks of a river, in a delta or at the bottom of a lake or the sea. Initially, sediments are loose, but as they pile up, they become increasingly compact, and as pressure and temperature increase, they eventually stick together to become solid rock, in much the same way as a clay object hardens when cooked. A rock formed by the aggregation of sediments originating from other rocks is called a sedimentary rock. Sedimentary rocks cover 3/4 of the Earth's surface. Sometimes, instead of forming from solid fragments of rock, they can form as a result of the precipitation of elements dissolved in water. In fact, when rocks are altered, some of the elements they contain, such as sodium, calcium, and magnesium, can be dissolved in the water and washed down rivers to accumulate in the sea. This is the reason why seawater is salty. Once in the sea, some of these salts are absorbed by organisms, usually microscopic, which need them to build their shells. When they die, the shells sink to the ocean floor, where they are compacted and glued together to form sedimentary rocks. In some environments, sedimentary rocks can form directly from the precipitation of dissolved elements, simply through evaporation, a bit like the white deposits that form sometimes on the bottom of a kettle or in a sink. But let's continue our story. Imagine, for example, a rock formed from the deposition of sediments on the ocean floor. Plate tectonics will cause this rock to move a few millimeters or centimeters per year, carried by the oceanic crust on which it lies. Sooner or later, the rock will end up in a subduction zone. There, the magmatic rock that formed the oceanic crust, along with the sedimentary rock that covered them, descend towards the Earth's interior and undergo an increase in pressure and temperature. This drastically transforms the rocks. Some minerals cannot withstand the new conditions and decompose to make way for new minerals to form. That gives rise to another type of rock, a metamorphic rock, because it is formed through the transformation or metamorphosis of pre-existing rocks. Metamorphic rocks form whenever there is an increase in temperature or pressure. Subduction zones, as we have seen, but also, for example, where plates collide to form mountain ranges. But metamorphic rocks don't exist forever either. If they are brought to the surface by a fault or by the erosions of rocks higher up, they are altered and transformed into sedimentary rocks. If conditions of exceptional temperature and pressure cause them to melt, they become magma and will eventually end up as magmatic rocks. So, thus far we have seen that there are 3 different types of rocks: magmatic, metamorphic, and sedimentary. and that rocks are constantly being transformed from one type to the other. But we still have to see the most interesting fact. Rocks can tell us a lot of things. In fact, it is almost exclusively thanks to rocks and what they tell us that we are able to learn about the past evolution of our planet, but also about what's happening inside it, as well as what is happening on other planets or on the moon, for example. This video is too short to go into detail, but by observing magmatic rocks, we can, for example, tell whether they were formed at the surface or at depth, and we can identify the characteristics of the magma that formed them. In this way, rocks can be used to identify traces of ancient volcanoes or oceans that disappeared millions of years ago. Sedimentary rocks are the most talkative of all rocks. If you understand them, they can tell you what kind of environment they were formed in, whether it was the sea, a lake, a plain crossed by a river, a glacier, or perhaps a desert. They can also tell us how they were transported, over what distance and in which direction. Finally, they can tell us about the type of climate and, if they contain fossils, what type of organisms were present when they were deposited. They can also tell us about past catastrophic events such as floods, tsunamis, or landslides. Metamorphic rocks tell us about major tectonic events such as ancient mountain ranges or earthquakes. This is why, when we visit another body in the solar system, we observe the rocks on their surface. It is partly thanks to this that we can guess whether they are active, whether there are volcanoes, for example, or whether it is possible that certain rocks have been transported by liquid water. In short, if you thought rocks weren't interesting, I hope I've convinced you otherwise. And if you enjoyed this video, please consider subscribing or giving us a thumbs up. This is all for today, but I hope to see you soon again for another video.